Now, I am very much aware that historians, Americans, and just most educated people especially educated in America, have been conditioned to understand the Civil War in a particular way. And the way that we have been taught to understand the Civil War is just not accurate. It's not aligned with the primary sources of the day, the records of the day, the legislation of the day, the communication of the day, the speeches of the day, the organizational records of the day. It just does not align. If as Trump would say today, it's fake news. And in fact, when he says that, I believe that was something Nixon and them used to say. So my research has to be heavily primary source based because this is such an unpopular view and people will just be resistant to it because it's easier to convince someone, it's easier to fool someone than to convince someone that they've been fooled. One of the primary sources that really illustrate the misrepresentation of the Civil War and of Lincoln is the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. You know, we always hear about the Emancipation Proclamation, but we never hear in detail. We know it was one, but why is it we are not taught about the drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation, especially the first draft that was published? And what's the difference between the two? And what's the big secret? This is the problem. And this is what everything goes around. Lincoln is the most popular and the most famous president. The only character that has been written more about in history than Lincoln is Jesus. Now, why is that? The story of Abraham Lincoln is political propaganda. Now, this is not to say Lincoln was a bad dude. Truthfully, even knowing who Lincoln truly was and what he did, he's my favorite president. Okay, as far as presidents go with me. I think he's the most important president. But he did not do what he was famous for. And what he should be famous for is not what's the first thing we think about him. When you hear Abraham Lincoln, you think free the slaves. He didn't. What he did was he had the hardest responsibility of any American president. The country itself split, and he brought it back together in less than a presidential term. That is almost impossible. So that alone makes him a revered American. That makes him a political genius. That makes him a historic politician. That makes him anything we want to call him, except for the great emancipator, because he didn't even represent himself that way. If we look at the primary sources of what Lincoln said about himself, and I will take us through each one of those things that he said about him, it doesn't add up. But in this particular video, we're going to start off with the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And just to go through some very short parts for you to get a grasp on what actually was happening. That is recorded. This is not Dr. Bolton just, oh, I'm going to bloviate and come up with some stuff to make you think. I'm saying Google it. I'm saying go to the Library of Congress, read it yourself. It's not going to change. It's just we don't read. I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States and Commander in Chief of the Army and Navy thereof, do hereby proclaim and declare that hereafter and heretofore the war will be prosecuted for the objection of practically restoring the constitutional relation between the United States and each of its states. Blah, 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 blah. That is my purpose upon the next meeting of Congress to again recommend the adoption of a practical measure tendering pecuniary aid to the free acceptance or rejection of all slave states, so called, the people where thereof not then be in rebellion to the United States. So the people who are in rebellion to the United States, this applies to you. If you're not in rebellion to the United States, it doesn't. So that's right off the bat. In every bit of Lincoln legislation that dealt with race or slavery, he always protected slavery. Even if he said, you can't have it, these people can. We're going to take it from this leadership and put it in this leadership. If we send the black folks out, colonization, to other places, the Constitution protects the right to own property, so we cannot send out the people that are owned. Slavery was always protected. I challenge you to find any Lincoln legislation that did not protect slavery. The Confiscation Acts, the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, all of them protect slavery. Find me one piece of Lincoln legislation that attacked slavery without exemption. It doesn't exist. Okay. And thereafter, may voluntarily adopt. He's talking about these southern states. They may voluntarily adopt immediate or gradual abolishment of slavery within their respective limits, and that the effort to colonize persons of African descent with their consent upon this continent or elsewhere with the previously obtained consent of governments existing there will be continued. He's trying in here, that's colonization. He's saying we can either colonize black people somewhere here, take them all, get them together, put them in here. And they did think about Texas. But what is significant is earlier the year before, in 1861, he recognized Haiti and Liberia. Haiti had been an independent nation for over 60 years. Liberia was almost 20 years. Those were two black nations. The United States had not recognized the black nations. Why did Lincoln recognize them? Those were the two nations that said, we want the black people to come here. Haiti was a new nation that broke off from the American Colonization Society. That was why Liberia was formed. Liberia. Liberia had broken off from the American Colonization Society. That's why it was formed. So Lincoln, who was a member since 1956 of the American Colonization Society, knew that he had possibilities of continuing to send black people there. Haiti had been promoting itself as a destination for people of African descent through colonization because they had lost so many people in the Haitian Revolution. They needed to build their populace back up. So even though this says, in an effort to colonize persons of African descent with their consent upon this continent or elsewhere with the previously obtained consent of the governments existing there, he already got Haiti and Liberia lined up. And notice he said it's with their consent. Slaves couldn't consent. So he's already working around. I'm not even messing with the people who are owned. This is only for emancipation, which is the government freeing people, which he's already saying the government can't because the Constitution protects that. But manumissions, the only people that he really could be talking about as far as their own consent are the so-called free blacks in the North. But we keep going. Even in the Emancipation Proclamation, even in the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, there is a subtle requirement that black people have to free themselves. Check it out. That on the first day of January in the long year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, therefore, and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and the naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons and will do no act or act to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts they make for actual freedom. So he's saying, if the states that are in rebellion to the United States maintain slavery after January 1st, 1863, all of the slaves are free as far as we're concerned. And if they were to cause an insurrection, the military or the Navy will do nothing to suppress it as long as they make any efforts they make for their actual freedom. Now, if indeed I'm freeing the slaves, this should say if anybody is still having slaves in a state that is in revolt against the country, the military will enforce or remove or assist these people wrongly being held in slavery. It says up here, first, we're going to try to get rid of. Second, the ones that are aligned with us, we're going to try to get rid of. Because again, it's got to be free black people. So that's the first part. Then we get to the second part. Yeah, even in the rebellious states, you have to free yourself. Now, we just weren't taught that. Let's go further. That the executive will, on the first day of January, by proclamation designated the states and parts of states, if any, in which people thereof respectively shall be in rebellion. Again, just the people that's in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any state and the people thereof on that day be in good faith represented in Congress by members so chosen thereto at elections of such state shall have participated, shall be in absence of strong countervailing testimony deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people thereof are not then in rebellion. So he's saying here, Georgia, if Georgia has a representative in Congress before January 1st, we're going to assume that you're good. So, but if you're that, this is how we're going to know who is in good standing and who's not in good standing. So we breaking this up into three parts. Number one, he's saying, my goal is to get rid of these black folks. So any black folks that's free, we're going to try to get them off the continent, or if we can find somewhere here, either one. But we already know in 1861, he recognized Haiti and Liberia. So that's already cooking. They've already had colonization attempts to Haiti. That's a dumpster fire all on its own. But the same day he signs the actual Emancipation Proclamation, not the preliminary, the actual Emancipation Proclamation, he signs a contract to start sending people to Haiti with a guy named Bernard Cobb. Real talk. Now, let's sit back and look at this. First thing he says, we're going to try to get rid of black folks. But in the states that are in rebellion, as if they don't have a person return back to Congress to work with the country, their slaves in our minds are free, but they have to make an act to free themselves. And if they do, the United States military won't help the state that's in rebellion. He didn't say that they were going to protect the freed slaves. They said, we're not going to help the people trying to get you, but we're going to protect the people that we are declaring free if someone still tries to impose slavery upon. Then we get to, if you come back, all bets are off, you're good. And you can keep slavery. Because again, the only people, he said, slavery will only end in the South if you are in rebellion. If you bring somebody back to Congress, all bets are off. That's not what we're talking about. But then Section 2 gets more interesting. That was Section 1. No, Section 9. And be it further enacted that all slaves of persons who shall hereafter be engaged in rebellion against the government, these are the states that's in rebellion that have slaves, or who shall in any way give aid or comfort thereto, escaping from such persons or taking refuge within the lines of the army, all slaves captured from such persons or deserted by them and coming under the control of the government of the United States, all slaves of such persons found on being within any place occupied by rebel forces and afterwards occupied by the forces of the United States shall be deemed captives of war and shall be forever free of their servitude and not again held as slaves. Now, did they say we are going to get them and free them and give them an economic floor? No, it says in any way given aid or comfort thereto, escaping from such persons, that all slaves of persons who shall hereafter be engaged in rebellion against the government of the United States, and who shall in any way give aid or comfort thereto. So if you are a friend to somebody who is in rebellion to the United States, or if you are in rebellion to the United States, all slaves captured from them, or deserted by them, or coming under the control, all slaves will no longer have a servitude on them. Now, this is a matter of capture. This language in no way is speaking of value to the person. So if you say, well, why are they working around this slavery thing? Why is that? I'm going to give it to you. It was not morality. Okay? It's for the same reason that they blocked off the ports. You have to, for me to win a war against you, it's not just who shoots the most people, it's strategy. I block off your ports so you can't get resources. And if I can stop your labor force, because you got to understand right now, the North is losing. The North is losing, and they have to figure out, how do we change this? I'm going to stop your labor force. So I'm going to capture your labor, because of course the South is not going to give the slaves guns, but they were the ones moving the artillery. They were the logistics. They were moving things. They were getting things set up. If I take your labor force, because now all of the South white men just had to fight and strategize. The North is trying to strategize. They're trying to fight. They're trying to do logistics. They're trying to do labor. They're trying to do all of these things. So that's the focus on the black people. That's why if you're not in rebellion against the United States, doesn't apply to you. I'm specifically stopping the people who are in rebellion. This is specifically a war strategy. Because other than that, if it was about slavery, it would be the border states, it would be the southern states, it would be northern racial codes. Anything that would promote fairness, inequality. But that's not even the conversation. Only if you are in rebellion against me am I even willing to approach or broach the topic of slavery. Now, why are there no classes that put these two documents next to each other? Because the document that they teach you about, the Emancipation Proclamation, does not have any reference to the effort to colonize persons of African descent with their consent upon the continent or elsewhere. It's not in the Emancipation Proclamation. And the next video, when I do the address to Congress of 1962, that's going to explain why that change is there. But there is a very specific reason as to why one document is taught and one document is not taught. And it has to do with politics. The story of Abraham Lincoln is, as I said earlier, political propaganda. All right? The story of Abraham Lincoln because of his popularity, because this is the guy who literally saved the Union. He should be number one president on that and that alone. Okay? If we begin to look at why is the freeing of the slaves more important than saving the Union? Why is saving America as we know it, black people owe thanks to Abraham Lincoln? Because black people have done well with all the faults of the United States. Of the people of the diaspora, black folks have done better in the United States than anywhere else that black people have been. Now, better is a relative term. But for what we have as Americans, we can be thankful that America is here in the form that it is. We have made the best out of what despite the limitations and obstacles that have been put before us. Whites have become members of a nation that has become a superpower in less than a century. And so on and so on and so on. Everyone who has benefited in America as the system in which it is owe that thanks to Abraham Lincoln. Does that remove the horrible things that's happened to women, Native Americans, Mexicans, black people? No, but that's just still a fact. So why is it saving the nation that all of these nationalities and people should be so thankful for? Why is that second seat to freeing the slaves? That is obviously not a concern of most of the country, because after this alleged abolishing of slavery that we're taught, our education system doesn't explain why immediately the same year, the same people who were freed were put right back into slavery through convict leasing. Same year. So this was obviously a plan. You know, they couldn't have come up with a plan. Oh, Lincoln got shot, and within days, we come up with how we're going to keep slavery going, because they had to rebuild the South, and they needed labor to rebuild the South. And the United States knew no other source of labor. The labor of the United States has always been black folks since the colonies. They just formed. They're just in their first 100 years. Slavery is still going on. The factories in the North that were running, that was making money, was processing the textiles from slavery. The industry, the Industrial Revolution that started in Europe and spread to the northern part of the country, was financed by slavery from the 13 colonies. So slavery, the financial model, the business model of slavery, was all America has known and all it still knows. That's why we incarcerate more people than any nation. That's why we incarcerate more minorities than any nation. And why our incarceration disproportionately affects that same group that was always historically the labor. So why is it something as important as saving the Union takes a second seat to something that most Americans don't care about, which is black folks? That's because the story of Lincoln is the story of American redemption. The righting of a historic wrong. The way to explain the unexplainable. We saw it in white man fought white man, and none of that happened. But if I control your education, you're never going to know it. You're never going to know it. And I'm going to tell you this story because you have to say, not just what are you educating me with? What are you not educating me with? And why did you choose what you chose? And why did you not choose what you didn't choose? Because these documents are easily accessible. So is this education or indoctrination? Now, we already know, again, if we just a little bit of history, John D. Rockefeller said we are not making, when he was talking about public education, which he was a primary funder of, we're not making a nation of thinkers. We're making a nation of workers. So I'm giving you the information I want you to have for you to do what I want you to do. And the story of Lincoln is the foundation of American elitism. Because the stigma that fell on America, especially when it split itself, was we've done well, but we've done it in a shameful way. I still got to hide because just like the Nazis hid the Holocaust and denied it, America did the same thing with slavery. And they still did it. If you say, oh, darnell, that's not true. Before Malcolm X got killed, he didn't get killed until he left the country and started bringing the issues to the United Nations, into different world organizations. That's when he suddenly came up dead. America has a reputation to protect. In fact, that's why the civil rights worked. Because when people saw how Americans in the South in particular were acting, even though they were just as hateful in the North, because Frederick Douglass almost got beat to death in Indiana, not in the South. Even though they were that hateful in the North, when they saw it in the South, people pulled judgment because white people pulled judgment. Because it made the country look barbaric. Which not surprisingly, is the same reason white people do not say nigger. That started in my lifetime. That started with the O.J. Simpson trial. Because there was a penalty by white people if you appear to be racist. People are not hiding their racism because they respect black people. We have no historic evidence that that's the case. Definitely not by and large. There are some people who have learned better, and it's some people who just weren't bad people. But the broad majority, and again, I said in another video, is 10% of whites that are hateful, that will do whatever to whomever. You have another 20% of whites who would do it, but they don't have the courage. The other 60% are scared of that first 40%. First 30%. Because that sword of white supremacy swings both ways. White people who were good to black people Oh, they got it from the Klan. They couldn't have jobs. They couldn't have peace. They couldn't, you know, have progressive ideas. So you have a significant portion of this group that's scared of that group. But then you have that 10% that we can't deny, your Robin DiAngelo's, your Tim Wise's, your John Brown's, your white people that just is like, look, I'm not wired that way. These people may be my color, but that doesn't make them my kind. I'm gonna stand on the side of right. And you so we have it. But this is about the story of American redemption. Because if you look at the primary sources, this is not the story of Abraham Lincoln or the Civil War.